My sister and I were kicked out on my 18th birthday. What we found in the valley saved us, but not in the way you might think. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about what home really means. If you've ever felt like the world had shut a door in your face, maybe you'll see a piece of your own story in ours. Stick around, and if this means something to you, consider subscribing. It helps more than you know. It all started with the sound of a deadbolt, a sharp metallic click that echoed in the cold November air, severing the last thread connecting us to anything we'd ever known as a home. I stood on the cracked concrete of my aunt's porch, the screen door still vibrating softly from her slam. To my right, my sister Maya, who was only 14, hugged herself, her breath pluming in the weak yellow light of the porch lamp. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at the door. She just stared at a loose thread on the cuff of her worn jacket, as if concentrating on it hard enough could rewind the last 5 minutes. I had just turned 18. My aunt had been counting the days. "You're a legal adult now, Liam," she'd said, her voice flat and devoid of any emotion except impatience. "You can sign your own papers. You can get your own place. You and your sister." She didn't say the last part with any particular malice. It was just a fact, like saying the sky was gray or the rent was due. The foster care checks for me had stopped. The ones for Maya were, in her opinion, not worth the trouble of a second teenager. She handed me a single black trash bag with a few of my clothes and another for Maya. Beside them on the porch sat one other thing, a small, scuffed wooden box. "Your mother's sentimental junk," she'd called it. "Take it. I don't want it collecting dust." And then, the click. The final sound. I looked from the locked door to Maya's small, hunched frame. The weight of that single moment felt heavier than all the 18 years that had come before it. It wasn't just the cold or the sudden homelessness. It was the crushing responsibility that settled onto my shoulders, a physical pressure in my chest. I was the adult now. I was all she had. The world suddenly felt enormous and sharp-edged, and we were two very small, very soft things about to be scraped raw by it. I nudged the wooden box with my foot. It was about the size of a shoebox, dark wood with tarnished brass hinges. It was the only thing we had left of our mom, who had died 2 years ago, leaving us in the reluctant care of her only sister. I remembered Mom keeping it on her dresser, always locked. I never knew what was inside. I just knew it was important to her. "Liam?" Maya's voice was a whisper, so quiet I almost didn't hear it over the distant hum of traffic. "What do we do?" I wanted to tell her I had a plan. I wanted to sound like the older brother she needed, the one who knew the answers. But the only thing in my head was the frantic, screaming static of pure panic. The streetlights flickered on, one by one, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to claw at the edges of our small island of porch light. We were an exhibit, 2 orphans, freshly discarded. I took a deep breath, the icy air stinging my lungs. "We walk," I said, my own voice sounding foreign and shaky. "We just walk for now, away from here." I picked up the 2 trash bags, their plastic crinkling loudly in the silence, and slung them over my shoulder. I nudged the box again, then bent down and picked it up. It was surprisingly heavy. I tucked it under my arm, the cold wood a strange, solid comfort against my ribs. Maya finally looked up at me, her eyes wide and dark. I saw the fear in them, but I also saw a flicker of trust. It was the trust that terrified me the most. It was a promise I had no idea how to keep. We walked off the porch and down the sidewalk, leaving the house with the single lit window behind us. We didn't look back. There was nothing there to look back at. Each step took us further into the vast, indifferent darkness of a city that was no longer our home, and deeper into an uncertain future that felt less like a road and more like a cliff's edge. We spent that first night huddled in the stale, fluorescent-lit waiting area of a 24-hour bus terminal. Every time the automatic doors hissed open, a blast of frigid air would cut through our thin jackets, a constant reminder of what was waiting for us outside. Maya eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep, her head resting on my shoulder, her body trembling with a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I stayed awake, watching the slow, methodical crawl of the clock on the wall. Each tick was a second of my new adult life slipping away, a second I was failing to provide, to protect. My mind raced, churning through impossible scenarios. Shelters were full. I'd already made a few desperate calls on my dying phone. We had a grand total of $47 between us, crumpled bills I'd saved from odd jobs. It was enough for a few meals, maybe a bus ticket to nowhere. Guilt was a physical thing, a sour taste in the back of my throat. I should have been better prepared. I should have seen this coming. But how do you prepare for the floor to drop out from under you? How do you prepare for family to treat you like a line item in a budget? I looked down at the wooden box resting on my lap. Mom's junk. Maybe it held an answer, or maybe it was just another dead end. Another piece of the past to weigh us down. With nothing else to do, I decided to find out. The lock was small and simple. I managed to jimmy it open with the edge of a stray paperclip I found on the floor. It clicked open with a soft, unsatisfying sound. I lifted the lid, my heart pounding with a ridiculous, desperate hope. There was no secret stash of cash, no precious jewelry. The box was filled almost to the brim with yellowed envelopes, bundled together with faded ribbon. Beneath them, however, was something else. I carefully lifted out the letters. Underneath, nestled in a bed of what looked like dried lavender, lay 3 items. The first was an old, tarnished brass key, the kind you'd see for a skeleton lock on a heavy wooden door. The second was a deed, a single sheet of thick, cream-colored paper, folded into a neat square. The third was a hand-drawn map on a piece of parchment that was soft and worn as old leather. I unfolded the deed first. The legal jargon was dense, but I could make out the important parts. It was a deed for 5 acres of land in a place called Stone Creek Valley, registered in my mother's name, and now, through inheritance, legally mine and Maya's. 5 acres. It sounded like a kingdom. But where was Stone Creek Valley? And what good was land when we needed a roof over our heads tonight? I picked up the map. It wasn't a professional survey. It was sketched in charcoal and ink, with handwritten notes in our mother's familiar, elegant script. It showed a winding road, a creek, and a cluster of hills. One hill was circled. An arrow pointed to a specific spot on its slope, marked with a drawing of a massive, sprawling tree. Next to it, she'd written, "The Sycamore Sentinel." At the bottom of the map, a single sentence was scrawled. "Your real inheritance isn't in a bank, Liam. It's in the earth. It's waiting for you." My hands were shaking. This wasn't junk. This was a plan. A crazy, desperate, last-ditch plan she had made years ago. She must have known. She must have known her sister, our aunt, wouldn't be a safe harbor for us forever. The knowledge was both a comfort and a fresh wave of grief. She had tried to protect us, even from beyond the grave. I pulled out one of the bundles of letters. The top one had my name on it. I gently untied the ribbon. "My dearest Liam," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. It means I'm gone, and that Carol has finally shown her true colors. I am so sorry. I am sorry I couldn't be there to see you become the fine man I know you will be. I am sorry you and Maya have to bear this. But I did not leave you with nothing. That land is yours. It's not much by most standards. It's rocky and steep, unbuildable, the real estate agent said. But it has a secret, a sanctuary. The map will lead you to the sycamore. The key opens the way forward. Trust the path, my son. Trust what I have left for you. It will be hard, but you are stronger than you know. Look after your sister. I love you both more than all the stars in the sky. I had to stop reading, my vision blurring. The quiet grief I'd been carrying for 2 years cracked open, raw and sharp. She had known. She had prepared a final life raft for us. It wasn't money, but maybe it was something better. It was a destination, a purpose. I looked at the bus schedule on the wall, my eyes scanning the list of towns. And there it was, Stone Creek, a single bus departing at 6 a.m. It was a 10-hour ride deep into the rural heart of the state, a place I'd only ever seen on maps. I looked at our $47. 2 tickets would cost $38. It would leave us with $9 to our name. It wasn't a choice. It was the only path there was. I gently nudged Maya awake. She blinked, her eyes bleary with sleep and confusion. "What is it?" she mumbled. I held up the map and the key. "I think," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I think Mom left us a home." The bus ride was a long, rumbling journey from one world to another. We left the city under the pre-dawn gloom, the familiar landscape of concrete and steel slowly giving way to sprawling suburbs, then to patchwork fields, and finally to the dense, rolling forests of the state's interior. For the first few hours, we didn't speak. Maya pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the world blur by, while I sat with the wooden box on my lap, my thoughts a tangled mix of hope and terror. What if the land was a lie? What if it had been sold for back taxes? What if my mother's secret was just the wishful thinking of a dying woman? The bus was a microcosm of transient lives. A young soldier sleeping with his head against his duffel bag. An elderly woman knitting a brightly colored scarf, her needles clicking in a steady, calming rhythm. A young couple with a baby who took turns walking the aisle to soothe its cries. We were all in motion, all heading somewhere, either running from a past or toward a future. For the first time, I felt a strange sense of belonging in that anonymous transit. We were no longer the discarded kids from a specific house on a specific street. We were just travelers, part of the flow. Around noon, I used 4 of our last $9 to buy 2 cellophane-wrapped sandwiches and 2 bottles of water from a rest stop. We ate in silence, the dry bread and processed cheese tasting like the most luxurious meal of my life. It was fuel. It was a small victory against the encroaching despair. As the hours wore on, the landscape grew wilder. The hills became steeper, the trees thicker. We started seeing signs for towns with names like Bears Hollow and River's End. I watched the green, unending wilderness roll past and felt a profound sense of my own smallness. The city had been overwhelming in its own way, a jungle of noise and people. This was different. This was an older, deeper kind of overwhelming. It was the vastness of nature, a scale that made human problems feel both insignificant and terrifyingly real. There was nowhere to hide out here. Maya finally broke the silence late in the afternoon. "Are you scared?" she asked, her voice quiet, still watching the trees. "Yeah," I admitted. "A little." "Me too," she said. She turned from the window to look at me. "But it's kind of exciting too, isn't it? Not knowing what's next?" I saw it then. She wasn't just my fragile little sister anymore. The last 24 hours had forged something new in her, a quiet resilience I hadn't seen before. Maybe it had been there all along. "Yeah," I agreed, a genuine smile touching my lips for the first time since the door had locked. "It is." The bus finally pulled into the town of Stone Creek just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The town was little more than a wide spot in the road, a single gas station, a general store with a faded Coca-Cola sign, a small post office, and a handful of houses. The bus hissed to a stop, and the driver called out the name. We were the only ones who got off. The bus pulled away with a groan of hydraulics, leaving us in a profound silence broken only by the chirping of crickets. The air was different here. It was heavy and damp, smelling of pine needles, wet earth, and wood smoke. It felt clean, ancient. We stood there for a moment on the gravel shoulder of the road, two kids with trash bags and a wooden box, completely out of place. A rusty pickup truck rattled past, the driver, an old man with a weathered face, giving us a long, curious look. I felt a fresh spike of anxiety. We were outsiders, intruders. I pulled out the map. According to my mother's drawing, the property was about 2 miles north of the town, up a winding dirt road that branched off the main highway. 2 miles. It might as well have been 100. The sun was disappearing fast behind the dark silhouette of the hills. "We should hurry," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "It'll be dark soon." We started walking, our footsteps crunching on the gravel. The road out of town was unlit, and as the last vestiges of daylight faded, the world was plunged into a deep, velvety darkness. The stars began to appear, more than I had ever seen in my life. They weren't the faint, hazy pinpricks of the city sky. They were brilliant, sharp, and overwhelming, a glittering canopy that stretched from horizon to horizon. It was beautiful, but it was also terrifying. The darkness felt alive, filled with the rustles and snaps of unseen creatures in the woods that pressed in on both sides of the road. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. Every shadow seemed to move. We walked close together, the trash bags rustling with every step. My arm, holding the box, ached, but the weight of it was a constant reminder of our purpose, our only hope. After what felt like an eternity, we found the dirt road, marked by a leaning, moss-covered sign that was too faded to read. It led steeply uphill into the heart of the darkness. This was it, the final leg of the journey. We left the relative safety of the paved road and started the climb, our phone flashlights cutting weak, bouncing beams into the oppressive night. The dirt road was more of a washed-out track, a rugged scar carved into the hillside. It was a grueling climb, our cheap sneakers slipping on loose rocks and damp leaves. The woods on either side were a solid wall of black, and the sounds of the night grew louder. The hoot of an owl, the distant cry of a coyote, the incessant rhythmic thrum of insects. My flashlight beam danced nervously over the path ahead, catching the spectral gleam of spider webs and the ghostly white bark of birch trees. Maya stayed close behind me, her breathing shallow and quick. I could feel her fear as if it were my own. My own bravado was a thin, brittle shell, threatening to crack with every strange sound. After nearly an hour of climbing, my legs burning and my lungs aching, I spotted it. Just off the side of the track, illuminated by the sweep of my light, stood a colossal tree. It was far larger than any of the others around it, its trunk gnarled and thick as a small car, its branches reaching out like ancient, twisted arms. The sycamore sentinel. It was real. A surge of adrenaline and relief washed over me, pushing back the exhaustion. We scrambled off the path, stumbling through the undergrowth until we stood at the base of the great tree. It was a living monument, radiating a sense of immense age and stillness. This was the spot my mother had marked on the map. This was where our hope lay. "Now what?" Maya whispered, her voice full of awe and uncertainty. I consulted the map again under the phone's light. It didn't show much more, just the tree and a small X behind it. "We look for a marker," I said, trying to sound confident. "Something that doesn't belong." We started searching, our weak beams of light crisscrossing the ground around the tree's massive roots. The forest floor was a thick carpet of fallen leaves and moss. Everything looked the same, a uniform expanse of natural decay. 10 minutes turned into 20. Desperation began to creep back in, cold and sharp. What if we'd missed it? What if it was buried, lost to time? What if this whole thing was a wild goose chase? "Liam, over here," Maya called out suddenly. Her voice was different, not scared, but focused. I rushed over to where she was kneeling, her light pointed at the ground near a thick, moss-covered root. She was pointing at a rock. It was about the size of a loaf of bread, and at first glance, it looked like any other stone. But as I looked closer, I saw it. On one side, nearly obscured by moss and dirt, was a faint carved symbol, a simple spiral. It was the same symbol etched into the lid of our mother's wooden box. My heart leaped. This was it. I dug my fingers into the damp earth around the stone. It was heavy, but it shifted. With a grunt, I heaved it aside. Underneath was not dirt, but a dark, gaping hole. It wasn't a hole exactly. It was an opening, a narrow gap between two large, flat stones, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. A thick curtain of ivy and roots hung over it, concealing it perfectly. A wave of cool, damp air washed over my face, carrying a smell I'd never encountered before. The scent of deep earth, of wet stone, of absolute ancient darkness. It was the smell of a cave. This was the secret, the sanctuary. "No way," Maya breathed, peering into the blackness. I took a deep breath. This is it. This has to be it. Fear warred with a thrilling sense of discovery. We were standing at the threshold of something unknown, a place prepared for us by a mother we barely remembered, a ghost leading us forward. I pulled the old brass key from my pocket. It felt heavy and significant in my hand. I knelt down and shone my light into the opening. Just inside, set into the rock wall, was a low, heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron straps. It looked impossibly old, and in the center of it was a large, dark keyhole. With a trembling hand, I inserted the key. It slid in smoothly, a perfect fit. I turned it. There was a loud, grinding clank of a bolt sliding back, a sound that echoed strangely in the confined space. The door was unlocked. I pulled the handle, and with a low groan of protest from its ancient hinges, the door swung inward, opening into a darkness so complete it felt like it could swallow the light from our phones. This was the moment of truth. We had followed the map, found the tree, and opened the door. Now we had to step through it. I looked at Maya. Her face was pale in the flashlight's glow, but her eyes were steady. She nodded at me, a silent confirmation. Together, we took the first step, leaving the moonlit forest behind and descending into the waiting earth. The air inside was immediately cooler, the silence profound. Our footsteps, which had been muffled by the forest floor, now echoed off unseen walls. The darkness was absolute, a physical presence that seemed to press in on us from all sides. My phone's flashlight beam felt pitifully inadequate, a tiny spear of light against an ocean of black. We moved forward cautiously, one hand on the damp, cold stone wall beside us. The passage was narrow at first, a natural corridor of rock that wound its way deeper into the hillside. After about 20 feet, it opened up dramatically. I swept my light across the space, and my breath caught in my throat. We were standing on a wide ledge at the edge of a vast subterranean chamber. The ceiling was so high our lights couldn't reach it, lost in the impenetrable darkness above. The chamber was immense, maybe the size of a school gymnasium, its walls a glittering tapestry of calcite deposits that shimmered and sparkled where our beams touched them. In the center of the chamber, a cluster of stalagmites rose from the floor, like the spires of a strange, underground cathedral. "Liam," Maya whispered, her voice filled with a reverence that mirrored my own. "It's beautiful." It was more than beautiful. It was majestic, a hidden world, silent and untouched for millennia, waiting for us. We had been expecting a small hole, a root cellar, a place to hide. This was something else entirely. This was a kingdom. We made our way down a gentle, natural slope from the ledge to the main floor of the cavern. As we explored, we realized this wasn't just an empty cave. Tucked away in a dry, elevated alcove to one side was evidence of our mother. A small, neat campsite. There was a folded canvas tent, a small camping stove, and a few stacked crates. And against the back wall of the alcove sat a large, dark green metal footlocker, the kind the military uses. It was sealed with a heavy padlock. I looked at the brass key still in my hand. It was too small for this lock. Then I remembered the other item from the box. I fumbled in my pocket and pulled out the small silver key that had been tied to the deed. It slid perfectly into the padlock. With a click, it sprang open. I lifted the heavy lid. A faint, familiar scent wafted out. The smell of our mother's perfume, a mix of lavender and something else I couldn't name. It was so unexpected, so potent, that it felt like a punch to the gut. It was as if she were right there with us in the darkness. The footlocker was packed with care. On top were several thick wool blankets and a stack of new clothes in our sizes. Jeans, sweaters, thermal shirts. She had tried to guess how big we would be. Beneath that were practical supplies, a first aid kit, waterproof matches, lanterns and fuel, bags of rice and beans, canned goods. It was a survival kit, assembled with love and foresight. But the real treasure was at the very bottom. A thick, leather-bound journal and another bundle of letters, tied with the same faded ribbon as the first. This bundle was much thicker. Each envelope was numbered. The first one simply said, "Read me first, together." I handed Maya one of the new lanterns and lit it. A warm, golden glow pushed back the oppressive darkness, filling our small alcove with a comforting light. We sat down on one of the wool blankets, the cold of the stone floor seeping through, and I opened the first letter. My mother's handwriting filled the page, as clear and steady as if she'd written it yesterday. "My dearest Liam and Maya," it began. "Welcome to your home. I know this must be a shock. I know you must have a million questions. I will try to answer them. When I first got sick, the doctors told me I didn't have much time. My first thought was of you two. I knew my sister Carol would take you in. The state would see to that. But I also knew her heart. I knew that for her, love was always conditional. I couldn't bear the thought of you being at her mercy when you were most vulnerable. So I took what little money I had, and instead of putting it in a bank where she could contest it, I bought this land. Everyone thought I was crazy, a useless piece of rock on a hill. But I'd heard old stories from the locals about caves in this valley. I spent the last year of my life, when I had the strength, coming out here. I explored every inch of this land until I found it, this place. I called it Althea's Cavern, after my grandmother. She always told me that the strongest houses are built in the rock. I had to pause, my throat tight. I could picture her here, alone, weak from her illness, but driven by a fierce protective love, preparing a refuge for a future she would never see. This cavern is your inheritance, the letter continued. It's part of a small, stable limestone system. There is a freshwater spring in the back chamber. You can hear it if you listen closely. It's safe. It's hidden. And most importantly, it is yours. No one can take it from you. I've stocked this locker with enough to get you started. The rest you will have to learn. Be brave. Be kind to each other. Your love for one another is the most important thing I am leaving you. All my love forever, Mom. We sat in silence for a long time after I finished reading, the lantern hissing softly. The cavern no longer felt like a strange, alien place. It felt like an embrace. The scale of her sacrifice, the depth of her love, was almost too much to comprehend. She hadn't just left us a place to live. She had left us a testament to her devotion, a final, fierce act of mothering that reached across time and death to shelter us. I looked at Maya. Tears were streaming silently down her face, glittering in the lantern light. They weren't tears of sadness, not entirely. They were tears of understanding, of grief, and of a profound, heartbreaking gratitude. We weren't orphans who had been kicked out. We were children who had been loved so much that our mother had literally moved the earth for us. The weight of our mother's letters settled over us, a heavy blanket of grief and love. We spent the next few hours in a state of dreamlike shock, exploring our new home. The freshwater spring was just as she'd described, a crystal-clear pool of water bubbling up from the rock in a smaller, connected chamber. Its gentle sound, a constant, soothing presence. The air was cool and clean. It felt safe, protected, a fortress built by nature and consecrated by a mother's love. But as the initial wave of emotion began to recede, the harsh reality of our situation started to sink in. We were two teenagers, alone, with a handful of supplies, living in a cave. The sheer insanity of it was staggering. Could we actually do this? Did we have any other choice? I found the next letter in the sequence, numbered 2. It was titled, "The Wolf at the Door." My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. This one wasn't about love and sanctuary. This one was a warning. "My children," it read, "I have to tell you about the other reason I chose this place. This valley is beautiful, but it is also coveted. A company called North Star Aggregates has been trying to buy up land here for years. They want to open a massive limestone quarry. They see these hills not as a home, but as a pile of rock to be crushed and sold. They made me an offer for this land, a generous one. When I refused, they became persistent. They use legal loopholes, intimidation, anything they can to get what they want. They will assume the property is abandoned now that I am gone. They will try to have it seized for back taxes, or declare it a public nuisance. You must not let them. The deed is in your name, clear and free. But you have to be smart. You have to be strong. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. It wasn't enough that we'd been abandoned by our family. Now we had a new, faceless enemy to contend with, a corporation. It felt like a battle between a mouse and a mountain. How could we possibly fight a company with teams of lawyers and millions of dollars? The letter continued. They cannot take the land if it is being actively used and improved. You must establish residency. Build something. Plant something. Make it unequivocally your home. There is a man in town, a lawyer named Arthur Pembroke. He was a friend to your grandparents. He is old and cantankerous, but his heart is good. I've spoken with him. He knows about you, and he knows about North Star. If you find yourselves in trouble, go to him. I have left a small retainer with him to cover his initial services. Tell him you are Althea's grandchildren. He will help you. This was the crisis, the impossible choice. The path our mother had laid out for us wasn't an easy one. It was a fight. We could ignore her warning, try to sell the land quickly, maybe even to North Star themselves, and take the money. It would be enough to get an apartment, to finish school, to live a normal life. It was the easy way out, the sensible path. But as I looked around the vast, glittering cavern, at the careful preparations our mother had made, the thought of selling felt like a betrayal. This place was her last gift, her final wish. It was more than just land. It was the physical manifestation of her love for us. To sell it would be to put a price tag on that love. To hand it over to be destroyed, blasted into gravel, felt like a desecration. I felt torn, my mind a battlefield. One side screamed at me to be practical, to take the money and give Maya a normal life, a warm bed, a real school. The other side, a quieter but more insistent voice, urged me to stay, to honor our mother's fight, to protect this incredible legacy. What right did I have to gamble with Maya's future? But what right did I have to throw away the only true home we had ever been given? I looked over at Maya, who was reading the letter over my shoulder. Her face was grim. "So we have to fight a big, evil company," she said, her voice small. "It looks that way," I said, my own voice heavy with doubt. This is the part of the story where everything could have gone a different way, where the fear could have won. And I have to ask you, if you've made it this far, have you ever been at a crossroads like that? A moment where the safe path is right there, clear and easy, but your heart, your gut, is telling you to take the rocky, uncertain trail. It's a terrifying place to be. It's where you find out who you really are. For anyone out there facing a choice like that right now, I just want you to know you're not alone. The hardest choices are the ones that define us. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to make a choice that scared you to death. Your stories matter. They help all of us feel a little less alone on those difficult paths. Now let's get back to the cavern and the choice that was waiting for us in the dark. I expected Maya to be the one to argue for leaving. She was younger. She was the one who deserved a life free from this kind of struggle. I was ready to hear her say, "Let's just take the money, Liam." I was ready for a fight, or for tears. But she surprised me. She stood up and walked to the edge of the alcove, looking out into the vast, silent darkness of the main chamber. The lantern light cast her small frame in a long, dramatic shadow against the cavern wall. For a long time she just stood there thinking. The only sound was the gentle drip of water somewhere in the distance, and the faint, musical murmur of the spring. When she finally turned back to me, her expression was one I had never seen before. It was fierce, determined. "No," she said, her voice clear and strong, echoing slightly in the immense space. "We're not selling. We're not running." "Maya, be realistic," I started, the voice of doubt still strong in my head. "This is a huge company. We're just kids. We don't know how to do any of this." "Mom knew," she countered, walking back towards me. "She believed we could. She didn't spend the end of her life setting this all up for us just so we could sell it to the first person who offered us a check. This is ours. She gave it to us." She knelt in front of me, her eyes locking onto mine. "Look at this place, Liam. It's a secret world. It's magic. All our lives, we've lived in places that weren't ours. Aunt Carol's house, the foster homes before that. We were always temporary, always guests who had overstayed their welcome. This is the first place that's actually ours. Mom made sure of it." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and clearing the fog of fear from my mind. She was right. She saw it more clearly than I did. I had been so focused on the danger, on the responsibility, that I hadn't truly seen the gift. This wasn't a burden. It was an anchor, a foundation. The choice was never really about the money versus the land. It was about who we wanted to be. Were we the victims of our circumstances, the kids who got kicked out and took the easy way? Or were we our mother's children, the keepers of her legacy, the defenders of this sanctuary? "She left us a home," Maya said softly, her fierceness softening into a deep, quiet conviction. "Not a bank account, a home. I want to stay." In that moment, the weight on my shoulders didn't disappear, but it changed its shape. It was no longer the crushing weight of fear, but the solid, grounding weight of purpose. I felt a surge of pride for my sister, for her strength, for her wisdom. She wasn't the little girl I needed to protect. She was my partner. We were in this together. I nodded slowly, a real smile spreading across my face. "Okay," I said. "We stay. We fight." A grin broke out on Maya's face, lighting up her entire being. The decision was made. A sense of calm settled over me. We had a home. We had a purpose. We had an enemy. It was a terrifying prospect, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were building. We spent the rest of that first night making a plan. It was clumsy and amateurish, sketched out on the back of one of our mother's letters. Step 1. Make the cavern livable. Organize the supplies, set up the tent properly, establish a routine. Step 2. Go into town. Find the lawyer, Arthur Pembroke. Learn everything we could about North Star aggregates and our legal position. Step 3. Establish our presence. Make it clear this land was not abandoned. We would build something, plant something, just as our mother had instructed. We would become part of this valley. We fell asleep just as the first hints of dawn were filtering through the cracks in the cavern entrance, casting faint gray light into our hidden world. We slept inside the tent, curled up in the new wool blankets, warmer and safer than we had been in years. It was the best sleep of my life. We had chosen the harder path, the one that led deeper into the unknown. But we had chosen it together, and for the first time, the future didn't feel like a cliff's edge. It felt like a foundation, solid and deep, carved out of the very rock beneath our feet. The next few weeks were a blur of hard physical labor. Our days fell into a simple, exhausting rhythm. We woke with the faint light that filtered into the cavern, our breath misting in the cool subterranean air. We would eat a simple breakfast of oats or canned fruit, and then we would get to work. Our first project was to make the alcove a true living space. We cleaned every surface, organized our mother's supplies into neat stacks, and used some of the lumber she'd left, carried in piece by piece, an incredible feat of determination on her part, to build a raised platform for our tent, getting it off the cold stone floor. We ran a simple clothesline where our perpetually damp clothes would hang, slowly drying in the still air. Every task was a lesson in self-sufficiency. I learned how to safely operate the kerosene lanterns, how to ration our food, how to purify water from the spring just to be safe. Maya, who had always had a green thumb, took charge of our first attempt at improving the land. Using seeds and tools also left by our mother, she started a small terraced garden just outside the cavern entrance, in a patch of earth that got a few hours of direct sunlight each day. She lugged buckets of soil and water up the hill, her small frame wiry and strong. It was back-breaking work, but she attacked it with a joyful ferocity. Seeing the first green shoots of lettuce and radishes poke through the soil felt like a monumental victory. 1 week after our arrival, we made the trip into town to find Arthur Pembroke. The town of Stone Creek looked different in the daylight. It was small and a little worn around the edges, but it had a quiet dignity. We found the lawyer's office above the general store, a simple wooden sign with faded gold lettering. A. Pembroke, attorney at law. We climbed the creaky wooden stairs and knocked on the door. A gruff voice called, "It's open." We entered a dusty, cluttered office that smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. Behind a mountain of paper sat a man who looked as ancient and weathered as the hills outside. He had a shock of white hair, thick glasses, and a deeply lined face. He peered at us over his spectacles, his expression somewhere between annoyed and curious. "What can I do for you?" he grumbled. "Mr. Pembroke?" I asked, my voice suddenly feeling very young. "We're Althea's grandchildren, Liam and Maya." The change in his demeanor was immediate. The gruffness melted away, replaced by a look of profound sadness and recognition. He slowly took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Althea's kids," he said, his voice now soft. "I'll be damned. I wondered when you'd show up. Your mother was a fine woman, stubborn as a mule, but one of the finest people I ever knew." He spent the next 2 hours with us. He confirmed everything our mother's letter had said. North Star Aggregates was a relentless predator, and they had already filed a petition with the county to have our property declared derelict. "But," he said, a sharp glint in his eye, "your mother was one step ahead. She placed the land in a trust for you, which I oversee. As long as you are living on and improving the property, North Star doesn't have a leg to stand on. Their petition is based on the land being abandoned. You," he said, pointing a bony finger at us, "are the living, breathing proof that it is not." He gave us a list of things to do. Document all our work with a camera. Keep receipts for any supplies we bought. Register for school through the county's remote learning program to establish official residency. Open a post office box. Each task was a small, crucial brick in the wall we were building around our home. We left his office feeling emboldened, armed with knowledge and a powerful ally. Our interactions with the rest of the town were tentative at first. We were an anomaly. The two mysterious kids who walked into town once a week to buy supplies and use the library's internet. People stared. They whispered. We got supplies from the general store, run by a kind but inquisitive woman named Mrs. Gable. "You two staying up on the old Miller place?" she'd ask, referring to the family who owned our land generations ago. I'd just nod and say, "Something like that." But slowly, a shift began to happen. The hardware store owner, a quiet man named Frank, started giving us a discount on nails and tools, never acknowledging it, just rounding the total down. The librarian, Ms. Peterson, would let us stay on the computers long after our time was up, showing Maya how to research advanced gardening techniques online. They didn't ask questions. They just offered small, quiet acts of kindness. They saw two kids working hard, trying to make a life for themselves, and they responded not with suspicion, but with a reserved, rural form of support. They were making us a part of the community, one small gesture at a time. One afternoon, as I was hauling a bag of cement mix up the hill, Frank from the hardware store pulled up beside me in his old pickup truck. "That's a long haul," he said, leaning out the window. "Throw it in the back. I'm heading up that way to check on a friend." I knew he wasn't, but I accepted the ride, my heart swelling with gratitude. We didn't talk much on the way up, but as he dropped me off at the bottom of our track, he just said, "Your mother would be proud." He tipped his hat and drove off, leaving me standing there, speechless. The world was still a sharp-edged place, but we were finding the helpers, the pockets of warmth. We weren't entirely alone anymore. A year passed, then another. The cavern and our lives were transformed. The primitive campsite evolved into a functional, rustic home. With Frank's help and a lot of trial and error from library books, I learned enough basic wiring to run a small, quiet generator for a few hours each day. We had lights. We had a small refrigerator. We built wooden partitions, creating separate sleeping areas and a small kitchen space. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, built with our own hands. The walls of the cavern, which had once seemed intimidating, now felt like a protective embrace. Maya's garden flourished. The small terraced plot became a thriving source of food. She learned the rhythms of the seasons, the quirks of the valley's soil. Soon, we had more vegetables than we could eat. On Mr. Pembroke's advice, we started selling the surplus at the small weekly farmers' market in the town square. At first, people bought our produce out of a mixture of pity and curiosity. They called us the Cave Kids. But they came back because Maya's tomatoes were the sweetest and her lettuce was the crispest. Our little stall became a regular fixture. We started to make a small but steady income. We were no longer just surviving. We were building a livelihood. The cavern itself, our great secret, also began to change its role in our lives. What started as a shelter became a source of inspiration. Maya began painting the cavern walls by lantern light, creating stunning murals of the constellations on the dark rock. I, inspired by my mother's journal, which was filled with geological notes, started studying the cave system more seriously. I learned about the unique formations, the delicate ecosystem, the history locked in the stone. Our battle with North Star aggregates settled into a long, slow war of attrition. They sent surveyors who were turned away by no trespassing signs and a call to the sheriff. They sent lawyers who were met with the stone wall of Arthur Pembroke's folksy but brilliant legal maneuvering. Our continued, visible presence on the land was our greatest weapon. We were no longer a legal loophole they could exploit. We were residents, neighbors, part of the community. The town, which had once viewed us with suspicion, now saw us as their own. We were the kids who had stood up to the big company, the kids who were reclaiming a piece of the valley's history. They became our unofficial guardians, reporting strange vehicles on the road, offering support and encouragement. The cavern had saved us, that much was true. It had given us shelter when we had none. But as I looked back, I realized its true gift was something deeper. It had forced us to become capable. It had stripped away everything we thought we needed and showed us what we were made of. Being kicked out of our aunt's house had felt like the end of the world, but it was a necessary ending. It was a violent push out of a nest that was never meant to hold us. It forced us to fly, or in our case, to go to ground. Home, I learned, isn't a building with four walls and a roof. It isn't a place you are given. It's a place you create. It's the work you put in, the love you pour out, the community you build. Our home was a cave, a place of darkness and stone, but we had filled it with light and life. We had taken our mother's legacy, her desperate, beautiful gift, and we had honored it. We had turned her sanctuary into our future. One evening, Maya and I were sitting outside the entrance, watching the fireflies begin to dance in the twilight. Our little solar-powered radio was playing a soft, crackling tune. The smell of stew drifted from our small kitchen inside. The garden was thriving below us. It was a moment of perfect, hard-won peace. "Do you ever miss it?" Maya asked quietly. "A normal life? A real house?" I thought about it for a moment. I thought about streetlights and television and the constant anonymous hum of the city. I thought about thin walls and nosy neighbors and the feeling of being temporary. "No," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "I don't. We have a real house. We built it." The cavern was no longer just a place. It was a part of us. Its stone was in our bones, its water in our blood. It had saved us by giving us a place to hide, but it had healed us by giving us a place to grow. It had become the heart of our new life, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most beautiful futures are built in the most unexpected places. Our story doesn't end with a dramatic courtroom victory or the complete vanquishing of our corporate foe. Life is rarely that clean. North Star Aggregates is still out there. They still own land in the valley, and their desire for the limestone under these hills hasn't vanished. But they've moved on to easier targets. Our fight became a quiet, stubborn stalemate. We are a thorn in their side, a small pocket of resistance they can't seem to dislodge. And with every passing year, our roots here grow deeper, our claim stronger. What the cavern became was more than just a home. It became a choice, a statement. It became a small business. After a few years, with the encouragement of Ms. Peterson, the librarian, we started offering very small, guided educational tours of the cavern's main chamber. We called it the Sentinel Caverns. We talked about the geology, the history, the delicate balance of the underground world. We used the money to pay our property taxes, to buy better equipment, to invest back into our home. It saved us financially, but more than that, it allowed us to share the magic of our sanctuary, to turn our secret into a source of wonder for others, teaching them to see the hills not as a resource to be exploited, but as a world to be protected. What started as a desperate act of survival had blossomed into a life of purpose. Maya is now finishing high school through the county's program and has been accepted to the state university to study botany. She wants to work in land conservation. She's brilliant and strong and has a laugh that can fill the entire cavern. I found my own path not in a classroom, but in the earth itself. I've become a self-taught geologist, a steward of this land. I manage our small tour business and work with local conservation groups to protect the valley from unchecked development. We are still the Cave Kids, but now the name is said with respect, with a kind of local pride. We are part of the story of this place, This whole journey started from the worst day of my life. It started with a locked door and the feeling of absolute hopelessness. It's strange to think that the greatest gift I ever received was being kicked out, being left with nothing but a box of my mother's junk. It forced me to read her map, to follow her path into the unknown. And that path led me here. It led us home. So if you're listening to this, and you're at your own locked door moment, I want you to hear me. When one path ends, it can feel like a death, but sometimes it's just a sign that you need to look for a different kind of map. Maybe it's not a literal map to a hidden cavern, but a map of your own strengths, your own resilience, the hidden sanctuaries inside yourself. The real inheritance is never about money. It's about the love that was poured into you, the strength you didn't know you had, the capacity to build a home in the most unlikely of places. What did this story teach you about the meaning of home? I genuinely love to know. If our journey has resonated with you, if it has given you even a small spark of hope, then please subscribe to the channel. This community is built for people who have walked through fire and are looking for the stories of those who made it to the other side. Share your own story in the comments below. Tell us about the time you found a home where you least expected it, or the time you had to fight for what was yours. I promise you, we read every single one. Your story matters, and you are not alone. Thank you for listening.